Hello there, and welcome to the Quantum Dragon podcast. My name is Brian Siegelwax, and I am but a humble dragon tamer. My guest is the Dungeon Master of Quantum Computing, Dr. James Wooten. He is also the Chief Science Officer at Moth Quantum, and he has an association with the University of Basel that I'll be asking him about later. Welcome to the show, Dungeon Master.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, let's jump right in. At some point in 2019, I had a question, and the IBMQ tutorial said that I should message you on Twitter. I'm personally grateful for that. But how did that come to happen that IBM Research announced to the entire world on YouTube that non-physicists, non-mathematicians, and noobs like me who had no idea what a quantum computer even was could use one for free via the cloud, and that all questions should be directed to your personal Twitter account?
Yeah, so it was a different world back then, I think. We had the IBM, what was it even called back then? Now it's called the IBM Quantum Platform, I think, but then it was the IBMQ experience. And
Yes,
it was,
yes, yes.
yeah, it had a sort of a Twitter integration when I was writing a Medium article, which is a tutorial on how to use it, and I wanted to give people links so that they could run their own circuit. And what you would need to do was export your circuit to Twitter, and then that would generate a link. So it was in that context that when we rejuvenated the tutorials, it felt natural to say, well, you have any questions? Well, here's me on Twitter to point them towards. That's not the way it would be done now. It would be towards the Qiskit Slack and all of that. But I think over time, when IBM Quantum expanded and became more formalized, and everything became a bit more formal. But back in the old days, it was just, find me on Twitter, mate.
See, now I feel like a noob because I totally missed that Twitter part. I saw, I guess, the remnant of that message you on Twitter, but I had no idea that there was a Twitter integration at any point. But speaking of the
Yeah, I'm not
tutorials,
sure how well
okay,
hidden it was, but I found it at least, and it was quite useful.
yeah, yeah, definitely interesting. No idea. But speaking of the tutorials, I noticed that you had been working on error correction for the past few years before joining Moth. My theory, after reading your papers, is that you were probably given the tutorials because you write clearly. Is my theory correct, or how did your work on the tutorials come about?
Yeah, so I suppose this goes back deep into the history. So in my PhD, I was doing topological quantum computing, especially as it pertains to error correction. So all of the error correction stuff goes way back. But in that, you're always imagining these systems of hundreds of qubits. So if your system that you're doing your simulations on doesn't have hundreds of qubits, then it's too small. Whereas you look in the lab and people have very small amounts of qubits. At that time, like something like 4 or 5 qubits was the best anyone had. So it felt like such a disconnect between the research I was doing and what was actually going on in the lab that I felt the need to do things that were a bit more relevant to the public out there. And one of those things is education. So I took on the opportunity to write a lot of blogs and Medium articles during my time while I was still a postdoc at the University of Basel. And then when I transitioned over into IBM Quantum, there would be the idea that I would continue doing some error correction, but also that would be something that I would be able to bring to IBM Quantum to be able to expand the tutorials and write the textbook. So it was the continuation of those efforts to be more relevant to the man on the street that I did that kind of thing.
That definitely makes sense. The most memorable tutorial after the first one is teleportation. I obviously
Mhm.
went in with a sci-fi expectation and was a little disappointed. And since you're an actual Trekkie, do you remember how you felt approaching that teleportation experiment for the first time?
So in teleportation specifically, strangely, I don't. You'd think it would be the day that I'd go into the class and think, wow, Star Trek's real. Um, but I think that's the kind of thing I would probably be reading up on before the class, and I would find it in a book and I would be amazed a bit about it. But I don't actually remember that moment. What I do remember is that at the end of my undergraduate, we have to do a short research project. And I chose to do a research project inspired actually by more by the no cloning theorem. And I took a perspective that was guided by one of the most famous episodes of Star Trek Voyager, in which you start off with two quantum states, essentially, Tuvok and Neelix, and then the teleportation process happens, and you just have one. So they got these two characters got combined into one person called Tuvix. And so what I wanted to look at is whether you could do something where you had a teleportation-like process, which would take two qubits in two separate states and then put them into essentially one qubit in one combined state. And also at the end of that episode, spoilers, um, but Captain Janeway straight up murders Tuvix and splits Tuvix out into Tuvok and Neelix again. So is that process possible? And I think it's kind of obvious that it's not taking a two qubit state into a single qubit state and then out to a two qubit state. It's not going to be a unitary process because there's going to be some loss of information there. But in going through all of those steps is what I did as my research project at the end of my undergraduate. Yeah, and they were quite accepting of a Star Trek based research project. So I think that taught me that it's okay to be openly Trekkie in all your science stuff. It's always actually surprised me when you go into higher levels, into PhDs and postdocs, the number of Trekkies around you seems to go down. Why, why do we become a rarer species? But anyway,
That does seem strange. I would think it'd be far more common.
yeah.
Okay, much to my chagrin, the IBMQ tutorials evolved into the Qiskit textbook. And I say chagrin because those tutorials were really good, and I still think they should be brought back. But speaking of Qiskit, you did early experimentation with mini Qiskit on Raspberry Pi. I haven't seen any mention of that in years, so whatever happened to that?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things here. The person who was mostly looking into Raspberry Pi specifically was Jan Laman, who is one of the Qiskit. It's not Qiskit advocate, or is it Qiskit advocate? There's so many different Qiskit this and Qiskit that that I forget. But he was an IBM up in Germany, and he even made these little Lego um, quantum computers, which was great. But yeah, there was a time back then when everyone wanted to get Qiskit running on really weird stuff, be it Raspberry Pis or even microcontrollers. And yeah, so micro Qiskit actually was what I came up with in order to be a very, very small version of Qiskit that you could run on basically anything. So it would just be the initial version, which I wrote on the London Underground, going to the QEC conference back in 2019 was just 100 lines long. And so that's easy to put anywhere as a Python file, but it's also easy to convert into other languages. So if you've got a context in which you need a simple way of making quantum circuits and a simple quantum simulator, but you need it in C++, then it doesn't take you very long just to convert that and rewrite it. So we made this micro Qiskit, and people have used it on various things. It's a bit of a niche thing, but it's been used, for example, in people um, wanting to try using quantum effects in music, because often in music you don't have the ability to install this big Python package and use it on your your normal music workstation. You need a file that's written in another language and is very small and just can be plopped in somewhere. So there has been some usage of micro-Qiskit over the last few years, but it's something at Moth that I kind of want to revive as we go out and teach new people in new areas to start experimenting with quantum computing. That micro Qiskit is something that could be used to enable that. So we cloned the GitHub repository and we've renamed it MicroMoth. So now it's called MicroMoth. Check it out. It's on GitHub. Yeah, it's still at the very basic, well, I think it's a little bit longer than 100 lines of Python code now. It might be 150. There's spaces and comments in there and everything just to mean that you can do something more. But it means that you can, yeah, just stick it on a little microcontroller and have some fun.
And I apologize for getting the name wrong. I don't know why I thought it was Mini, but I'll look up Micromoth and I'll provide a link under the audio for the podcast to
Yeah,
Micromoth.
thanks.
It's also been a while since I've seen you use Qiskit for terrain generation for games, but I want to follow the sacred timeline a little further back. My
Hmm.
first association of you with games was your citizen science experiments. How did that get started? Do you have anything ongoing? And are there any future prospects for citizen quantum science or quantum citizen science or whatever it would be called?
Hmm. Yeah, so this was born out of what I mentioned earlier, my desire to do something that was a bit more relevant to real people. And it was, in fact, in Arosa. I was in Arosa, which is a place in Switzerland, and it was where Schrödinger came up with the wave equation. So, arguably, the birthplace of quantum mechanics. And I was asked by one of the technology transfer officers of our funding agency whether any of my research has any ability to become a spin-out company. And because I was working on sci-fi hundreds of qubits when there was only 4 qubits in the world at the time, that seemed laughable. But it got me thinking and it made me realize that quantum error correction is essentially going out into the quantum computer, looking for hints of the errors that have occurred, and then trying to solve the puzzle of what errors happened in order to fix them. And so, since it's inherently a puzzle, let's take that puzzle and make it into a puzzle game. And then we can take some of the sort of harder elements of quantum error correction, or at least some of the ones that are uh, more suitable for heuristics that you don't have a big fancy algorithm like minimum weight perfect matching, but you need to do it a bit more heuristically, and then we could put them in front of real humans and see how they do them. And this is simultaneously we might be able to get insights for the science, but it's also a way to educate people and bring people close to what we're doing in quantum error correction. So it's really born out of that desire to do something for real people. But that was then the year before IBM put 5 qubits on the cloud. So while I was in outreach and citizen science mode, I got started with, well, let's do games on quantum computers now.
Okay. And if they're still available, I should find those links and I'll include those also.
Yeah, I think
And
Dikodoku is at least available on itch.io as so a web version. Whether it's still on the app stores, I can't remember because they complain at you every few years that you've got to press a button or they'll take your app down. And I don't always press the button.
I'll take a look for it. And you just mentioned games. So before I knew what a quantum computer is, you were already chronicling the history of games for quantum computers, which which can still be found on Medium, and I'll link to that. So, naming aside, how did you become the dungeon master of quantum computing? How did you become synonymous with quantum gaming?
Um, well, there might be some other people who are also synonymous in certain ways. A lot of people have done quantum game stuff over the years, like tic-tac-toe with cues, quantum chess, and so on. But I think 2016, which was when I did my citizen science project, seemed to be a big year in quantum games. I had my citizen science project, Dikodoku. Um, also, there was the citizen science project Mequonics. There was another citizen science project called Quantum Moves, I think it was, that came out of the University of Aarhus in Denmark. So there were these three suddenly appearing in the world at the same time. I think Quantum Chess maybe also came out that year, not a citizen science project, but another quantum game. So at that time, I was just one of many. But then, because the following year, IBM Quantum had its first device on the cloud, and I immediately went into, well, let's see if I can make incredibly simple games like rock, paper, scissors and battleships that run on this. That maybe that put me a little bit apart from the other ones because had this now obsession with running things on real hardware. Although quantum chess would later be run on real hardware as well on the Google systems. But then because I was running things on the IBM Quantum device, uh, they noticed me at IBM Quantum, and there was an idea that we would make an app together. In fact, the original idea that it should be a game that runs on their quantum computers. And in the end, that's not what happened. It became an educational game called Hello Quantum, which unfortunately is not still online. Um, I've still got it installed on one of my phones, but you can't get it anymore. But then that also solidified me being a person who does quantum games. Yeah, but of course, as I say, there's a lot of other people who've been working in this area as well.
I think I remember Hello Quantum. It was kind of triangular and then
Yeah,
had purple. Was it purple? Or am
yeah,
I making
it
that up?
was purple. So it was a depiction of the state of two qubits using basically colored circles to represent the expectation values of all of the Pauli expectation values that don't involve a y. So a limited representation of a quantum state, but one that makes Clifford gates very obvious in what they do, because it's kind of like a Rubik's cube in that when you apply a Clifford gate, it just shifts these values around. And so it was able to give people a sense of what is different about a quantum computer, what is different about qubits in a way that is a bit more intuitive. In fact, the way we landed on it in the end was to just give a puzzle game and say, here's a puzzle game. And then someone would play the puzzle game, they'd learn the rules of the game. And then after that, you would be able to say, what you just did was quantum computing. The board you were playing on represented a quantum state. And then you explain to people what it represented and what they were doing and what these gates were, building on the intuition that they've just built up by playing the game rather than just going in cold. Um, we did also have a version that only existed in Jupyter notebooks where it would explain to you every time, okay, now you're doing 2 qubits. Now you're going to be using a controlled knot. So it was more explicitly pedagogical, but I also like this way of just giving people a chance to build up an intuition and then telling them at the end, that was quantum.
Yeah, I don't remember where I saw it, but it does, the name and image is familiar. So back
Yeah.
to terrain generation for a moment. Generative algorithms have many potential applications. How has your work and or play evolved over the years, whether in regard to your own usage or others citing your work and building upon it?
Yeah, so in trying to think about what quantum could do for games, because, well, if you look back into the history of games, so computer games in general, there was an era in which it was the games that were doing a favor to the computers. There were these variants of like tic-tac-toe on these vacuum tube devices, just as a way of showcasing the devices. And then when you had Space War in 1962, for the first time you had a game that was something unique. Computers were giving something unique to games that you didn't have before. And then you had to wait another 10 years until the first commercial success. But yeah, I think if we take that lesson and apply it to what's been going on in quantum games, then these first examples, like the Citizen Science Project of 2016, me just running something on a quantum computer because I could in late 2016, early 2017, and so on. These were games doing something for quantum computers, being able to showcase it and educate about it to a degree. But then what I really wanted to look at was, well, how will quantum computers actually do something for games? What will quantum computers contribute to games? And if you look at some of people's quantum games where they look at single qubit, two qubit, and think about how the the properties of those qubits might influence the game mechanic. People have been making these games in game jams over the years where you'll have Qiskit and it gets called every frame in order to implement some game mechanic. But that's very much what can what can games do for quantum computers kind of thing, because that's never going to actually run on real hardware. If you're calling every frame, that's just completely impractical. So you've got to think, where is the quantum computer, or when is the quantum computer actually going to run in a game? And one place it could run is in a loading screen, because there's enough time there. Another place it could run is in the background as you're playing one level, it's doing something to set up the next level. Or it could just play in the game design process. The game designers might be using it for something to set up the game and it doesn't actually run live. And so the kind of tasks that would be suitable for a quantum computer when it's running within those constraints are things like procedural generation. So calculating what the next game should be in the kind of games where you generate the levels rather than everything just being handmade. And there's a lot of different computational tasks involved in procedural generation. Some of them are what I call at the easy end, like noise functions, and some are at the hard end where you're solving optimization problems and constraint satisfiability problems. So I've always thought this is a nice field to work in, because down at the easy end, you can do things already with simulations of quantum systems, or you can do things with early NISQ devices. And at the hard end, you need fault tolerance. So it's an era where you're not just waiting for the hardware to one day be good enough and then suddenly then you can do things. It's a field where as the technology progresses, you can always try to take the best technology and use it for something. So where I feel I'm progressing since there is now we're kind of at a point where we can really start to use real hardware. In my previous terrain generation, some of that was admittedly easier to run on a simulator than it was on real quantum hardware. But now I think we're at a point where we can run things that would be at home on a simulator, but would also be at home on quantum hardware if you had it. So maybe it's not quite space war yet. Maybe it's tennis for two if we draw a parallel with the history of normal games. So it's something that's not not quite unique to quantum computing because you can run it on a simulator, but it's It's almost there.
And it's more fun.
Yeah.
So you recently transitioned from IBM Quantum to Moth Quantum, and I'm guessing they're not working on error correction over there. So what does a day of chief science officership look like at a company focused on music, gaming, and arts?
Well, it involves a lot of emails. I think that comes with the chief. A fair few meetings. Yeah, so in terms of whether I'm doing error correction, well, we are wanting to make things that run on the quantum computers of today, but also the quantum computers of the future. And I think it's important then that you know how error correction works so that you can design for it. So we are going to be doing a bit of that. But day to day, yes, I haven't been doing any quantum error correction recently. Really, what we want to do is to be useful, really. That's our main mission. And to be useful, of course, to people in the creative industries. So we're looking into what we can do with quantum computing, what kind of things would be relevant both in the fault-tolerant era, but also now. But we also want to set up partnerships with people who could actually be using this at the other end. So talking to artists that are interested to use the technology so that we can create something that they're actually being able to use. So for example, last week there was every day was built around the time of day that on AWS bracket a particular quantum computer had its publicly available hours. So we would go on there and try something new in order to build up towards running something interesting during a reservation time, hopefully later this week.
Okay, sounds interesting. I suddenly feel like sending you emails for no reason, by the way. I won't, but yeah, I feel like it all of a sudden. You also have an affiliation with the University of Basel, and I honestly can't think of a joke for that. But what does that continued association entail?
Yeah, so well, I used to work there and then I left, but they never fully got rid of me. So I just hang around every now and again, and they have to run me out with a brush, but or a pitchfork, depending on how charitable they're feeling. But yeah, it was because when I was at the University of Basel, I used to teach. I used to teach two two courses a year, and when I left, it was not completely disjointed because even before I left the University of Basel, I was collaborating a lot with IBM Quantum to create the Hello Quantum game. And then after I left the University of Basel, one of the big things that we were doing was applying for funding from the Swiss government as part of this Swiss consortium called the NCCR Spin to build spin qubit quantum computers in Switzerland. That's something the University of Basel leads, but IBM Quantum, or at least IBM Research Zurich, the lab there, was also involved in. So I went from being at one place collaborating with the other to being at the other place collaborating with the first place. And so then it felt natural to continue the teaching, especially as part of this sort of collaboration that we had as part of the NCCR spin. And also because I was writing tutorial content at IBM Quantum, and there was an idea that this content would be useful for people who were teaching courses on quantum computing. So what better way to test that out than to do it myself? So yeah, I continued that uh, up to the present day. So even now at Moth, I continue that teaching. It's written in my contract. James gets to go and teach at the University of Basel. Um, and now I've even got this status of Privatdozent, which means they let me teach. They let me teach before they gave me the status, but I don't know. I guess they let me teach properly now. And even I got an upgrade to my title. It's not just doctor anymore. It's Dr. Habil James Wotton. So there you go. There's a thing to confuse everyone who's not familiar with the very particular academic system of the German-speaking countries.
Yeah, that definitely happens. That sounds like a fun class, by the way, because I remember you made a YouTube video many years ago, and I think it was a joke about a cat. I don't remember the joke, but I remember you were like explaining something, and it was just hilarious, whatever it was. So, whatever you're teaching, that sounds like it would be a fun class. And my
Hopefully
last
so.
question is, do you have a favorite quantum gate?
Yes, that's an interesting question. It'll be so that I think there are gates that are universal by themselves, and that would be a good example because then everything is contained in that one gate. But they're not ones you use in real life. So because of that, I don't really like them that much. Um, and some people might say something like the Hadamard, because if you take classical computing, at least in reversible form, and add the Hadamard, that is a universal gate set. Although you need an extra qubit to be your imaginary unit, but anyway. But I have a I have something against the Hadamard in some ways because so many quantum game jams I went to where people would just learn that they could do a Hadamard and then measure, and that would be a random number generator. And they didn't progress further into the wonderful world of quantum, but just made a normal game with a random number generator in. So, so it's not the Hadamard. I think the the square root of swap, or if we were to have general parameterized fractions of the swap gate, like that you can do a full swap or half a swap or a quarter of a swap. Because a swap, I suppose it's a little bit like teleportation, not in the well, not in the way that you have in quantum teleportation, where there's this non-local effect going on, but I suppose more like a Star Trek teleportation, where they're making an interaction happen to do the teleporting. So I guess it comes back to Star Trek, doesn't it? It's arbitrary fractions of the swap gate.
Interesting. I didn't predict that answer, a Star Trek answer. I thought you were going to either go with T, because there's a coffee joke in there, or I really thought you might go with Z, which goes way back to Mike and Ike. So I thought you there was a chance of
Oh
you
yes,
playing with one of those, but
there is the whole introduction to micronike, making it very explicit how that letter is
yeah.
pronounced.
But then drawing that back to Star Trek, I didn't see that coming, but that makes a lot of sense actually. And your aversion to Hadamards, that's awesome. So I seem to be out of questions, and the dungeon master is supposed to be in charge anyway. So the floor is yours to say anything else you'd like to say.
So yeah, what do I want to say? Well, I suppose in terms of this new role at Moth, this is something where we're trying to use quantum computers to be useful for people in the creative industries. We're looking to make use of quantum advantages in the fault tolerant era, but in the near term era, it's nice in the creative space where you don't have right answers that you have to find. And what's more interesting for people in the creative space is to have a tool that is unique, that brings unique perspectives. So in the near term, it's less about chasing advantages, which may be ephemeral, and more just about building things on quantum computers and finding unique perspectives. So I know that's not what most people in quantum computing are doing, but hopefully it should be fun. And so, of course, if anyone out there wants to join in on the fun, they can, find all of the links online. The good thing about being called Moth Quantum rather than generic quantum computing company is it's easy to Google.
Um, Actually, when I try to tag Moth, it comes up with other stuff I have to scroll down, believe it or not, to find Moth. Because when
Well,
I've
if you
included Moth for some reason in the Quantum Dragon, then which happens quite a bit because you do these creative things.
Hmm.
For some reason, Moth makes me scroll down the at Moth on LinkedIn to to find that tag,
Yeah,
which you wouldn't
yeah, it's
expect.
a little bit annoying on tagging on LinkedIn. I'll agree with you. But if you Google Moth Quantum, then you get us and a boat, I think. So maybe the final thing to say is that we're not the boat.
Yes.
Well, then maybe we should go into that area.
Yeah, I was just thinking that too. You've got arts and music and gaming. Why not add boating? Why not?
Yeah,
Sounds
I
like
mean,
fun.
the listeners won't know, but you've got a very nice sea background at the moment.
That's
So,
almost realistic, actually. That's not too far of a walk to actually see that. So when
yeah,
anybody
so, well,
asks for the temperature here, I always say two because that's my air conditioner setting. It's always the temperature is always two.
yeah. Well, maybe we'll get one of those Moth Quantum boats and sail in and visit you at some point.
Yeah, yeah, get some scuba diving going also. Scuba diving boat. That's my
Mm.
suggestion. But anyway, thank you very much for being my guest. You have the distinction of being the first person in quantum I ever messaged. They say there's no such thing as a stupid question, but I remember asking you a resoundingly stupid question years ago, and I appreciate you nudging me toward enlightenment. I'd also like to thank everyone who is still listening. If there's ever going to be a podcast for which you should stick around and listen to the outro music, it's definitely this one. It's called Dungeons and Dragons, and it's appropriate now more than ever. Enjoy.